The autumn wind carried whispers across the Colorado Territory like tumbleweeds rolling through abandoned streets, and every whisper carried the same word: demon. It followed Magdalena Reyes wherever she went, a shadow darker than her black shawl, more persistent than her own footsteps on the dusty roads between settlements. The word had power here in the high country, where superstition ran as deep as mountain streams, and fear could spread faster than wildfire through dry timber. At 23, Magdalena had grown accustomed to the way conversations stopped when she entered a room, the way mothers pulled their children closer when she passed, the way men crossed themselves and muttered prayers in Spanish when they thought she was not watching. She had been called bruja, hechicera, and worse things in both English and Spanish, all because she possessed knowledge that frightened people who preferred their mysteries to remain unsolved. The trouble had started 3 years ago in the mining town of Silver Ridge, when Magdalena successfully treated a case of blood poisoning that the town doctor had declared hopeless. The miner lived, his fever broke, and his infected wound healed clean. But instead of gratitude, the miracle brought suspicion. How could a young Mexican woman succeed where a university-trained physician had failed? The answer, whispered in saloons and church pews alike, was that she must have made a bargain with darker powers. The accusations had followed her from town to town across the territory. Everywhere she went, her successes in healing became evidence of supernatural interference. When she saved a child from pneumonia, they said she had stolen the sickness and given it to someone else. When she helped a woman through a difficult childbirth, they claimed she had made a pact with evil spirits. No good deed went unpunished in a world where people needed someone to blame for their fears and misfortunes. Now, as she walked the main street of Cedar Falls with her leather satchel of herbs and remedies, Magdalena could feel the familiar weight of hostile stares. The town was larger than most she had visited, prosperous enough to support both a doctor and a pharmacist, which meant her services were even less welcome than usual. She had come here following rumors of a diphtheria outbreak, hoping to help before the disease could spread, but the reception had been colder than the October air. "There she is," a woman's voice carried clearly from the general store porch. "The demon woman. I heard she can curse a man just by looking at him." "They say she killed 3 people in Durango just by touching them," another voice added. "Sheriff there was going to arrest her, but she disappeared like smoke." Magdalena pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and continued walking, her dark eyes fixed on the road ahead. She had learned long ago not to respond to such talk, not to defend herself against accusations that grew more fantastic with each telling. The truth was simpler and more mundane than any of them suspected. She was a curandera, a traditional healer who had learned her skills from her grandmother and had dedicated her life to helping people who had nowhere else to turn. Her grandmother, Esperanza Reyes, had been the most respected healer in their village in New Mexico, sought out by rich and poor alike for her knowledge of medicinal plants and her gift for diagnosing illnesses that baffled others. She had taught Magdalena that healing was a sacred calling, that the ability to ease suffering was a gift from God that should never be used for personal gain or selfish purposes. But Esperanza had also warned her granddaughter about the dangers that came with such knowledge. People feared what they did not understand, and they often preferred to destroy what they feared rather than learn from it. She had made Magdalena promise to use her gifts wisely and to always remember that helping others was worth any personal cost. That promise had sustained Magdalena through 3 years of wandering, through towns that welcomed her in desperation and drove her out in fear, through nights when she slept under the stars because no inn would give her shelter. She had saved dozens of lives and eased countless suffering, but the cost had been her own isolation, her own chance at the normal life that other women her age took for granted. As she reached the edge of town, Magdalena paused to look back at Cedar Falls. The main street was busy with afternoon commerce, women in colorful dresses shopping for goods while their children played in the dust, men discussing business and politics outside the saloon. It was a scene of ordinary life, the kind of community that she had always dreamed of being part of but had never been allowed to join. She was about to turn away when she noticed the rider approaching from the north. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle, his broad shoulders outlined against the mountains that rose like cathedral spires behind him. Even at a distance, she could see that he was tall and lean, with sun-darkened skin and hair the color of autumn leaves. He wore working clothes rather than town attire, marking him as one of the ranchers who raised cattle in the high meadows surrounding Cedar Falls. As he drew closer, Magdalena found herself studying his face with the analytical eye she usually reserved for patients. He appeared to be in his late 30s, with strong features weathered by years of outdoor work. There were lines around his green eyes that spoke of both laughter and sorrow, and something in his expression suggested a man who had learned to be careful with his trust. The rider reined in his horse as he reached the main street, and his gaze swept across the town with the attention of someone checking for changes since his last visit. When his eyes found Magdalena standing at the edge of the road, they paused with curiosity rather than fear. "Afternoon," he said, touching the brim of his hat in polite greeting. Magdalena nodded in return, surprised by the courtesy. Most people either ignored her completely or made a point of crossing to the other side of the street when they saw her approaching. "You would be the healer woman I heard about," he continued, dismounting and approaching on foot. "Magdalena Reyes, is it?" "That is correct." Magdalena kept her voice neutral, unsure of his intentions. "Though most people prefer to call me by other names." A slight smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I imagine they do. People in these parts have never been comfortable with things they cannot explain." He extended his hand in introduction. "I am Connor McBride. I have a ranch about 10 miles north of here." Magdalena shook his hand, noting the calluses that spoke of hard work and the gentle strength of his grip. "It is a pleasure to meet you, Mr. McBride." "The pleasure is mine." "I have been hoping to run into you, actually. I heard you might be able to help with a problem I have been dealing with." This was unexpected. Magdalena had grown accustomed to people seeking her help in secret, under cover of darkness, or when no one else was watching. Connor McBride was speaking to her openly in broad daylight on the main street of town, apparently unconcerned about who might see or what they might think. "What kind of problem?" she asked carefully. "My ranch foreman came down with something a week ago. Started with a sore throat, then fever, then spots on his throat that looked like they are covered with gray leather. Doc Harrison took one look and said there was nothing he could do except make him comfortable until the end." Magdalena felt her pulse quicken. The symptoms Connor described sounded like diphtheria, the same disease she had come to Cedar Falls hoping to treat. If it had already reached the outlying ranches, it was more widespread than she had feared. "How is he now?" she asked. "Bad. Getting worse every day. He has been like a father to me since I was 15 years old, Miss Reyes. If there is anything you can do to help him, I would be grateful beyond words." There was genuine pain in Connor's voice, the kind of anguish that came from watching someone you loved suffer while being powerless to help. Magdalena had heard that tone countless times before, and it never failed to touch her heart. "I cannot make any promises," she said carefully, "but I have had some success treating the condition you describe. If you are willing to take me to him, I will do what I can." Connor's face lit up with hope and relief. "I will have you there within the hour. My horse is strong enough to carry both of us." As Connor helped Magdalena mount behind him, she became aware of the attention their interaction was drawing. People had stopped their shopping and conversations to stare at the unprecedented sight of a respected rancher publicly asking for help from the woman they considered a demon. She could see shock and disapproval on many faces, but Connor seemed oblivious to the scrutiny. They rode north through country that took Magdalena's breath away with its rugged beauty. The road wound through valleys carpeted with golden aspen leaves, past meadows where cattle grazed beside crystal-clear streams. The mountains rose on all sides like sleeping giants, their peaks dusted with early snow that caught the afternoon sunlight like scattered diamonds. "This is beautiful land," Magdalena said as they crested a ridge that revealed an even more spectacular vista. "It is the most beautiful place on earth," Connor replied with quiet pride. "I have been working this ranch for 22 years, and I still find something new to appreciate every day." "You have been here since you were 15? "Since the day my parents died in an influenza epidemic back in Kansas. Old Pete Kowalski took me in when I had nowhere else to go. Taught me everything I know about ranching and life in general. He is the one who is sick now." Magdalena could hear the emotion in Connor's voice as he spoke of the man who had clearly been more than an employer to him. It explained the desperation in his request for help and his willingness to risk his reputation by associating with her. The McBride Ranch, when they finally reached it, was exactly what Magdalena would have expected from a man who spoke of the land with such reverence. The buildings were well maintained and thoughtfully placed to take advantage of natural windbreaks and water sources. The main house was modest but solid, built from local stone and timber with careful attention to both function and beauty. Connor led her directly to a small cabin behind the main house, where she could hear the harsh, labored breathing of someone struggling with advanced respiratory illness. Inside, she found a man in his 70s lying on a narrow bed, his face flushed with fever, and his throat visibly swollen. Pete Kowalski was clearly very ill, but as Magdalena examined him, she found reasons for hope. The disease had not progressed as far as she had feared, and his general constitution seemed strong enough to fight the infection if given proper support. "Can you help him?" Connor asked anxiously. "I believe so. But it will require intensive treatment for several days, and there is no guarantee of success. Whatever you need, money, supplies, anything." Magdalena set to work immediately, using techniques passed down through generations of curanderas. She prepared teas from specific combinations of herbs that would help reduce the inflammation in Pete's throat and support his body's natural healing processes. She created poultices to draw out the infection and used traditional remedies to bring down his fever. As she worked, Connor proved to be an excellent assistant, following her instructions precisely and showing none of the squeamishness that often accompanied people who were unfamiliar with traditional healing methods. He seemed genuinely interested in what she was doing and asked intelligent questions about her techniques. "Where did you learn all this?" he asked as Magdalena prepared a complex herbal mixture. "From my grandmother, who learned from her grandmother, going back generations. This knowledge has been preserved by the women of my family for hundreds of years, and yet people call you a demon for using it." Magdalena glanced up from her work, surprised by the bitter edge in his voice. "You do not believe such things. I believe in results. If your methods help Pete get better, then they are good methods, regardless of what ignorant people might say about them." By evening, Pete's condition had stabilized enough for Magdalena to feel cautiously optimistic. His fever had broken slightly, and his breathing was less labored than it had been when she arrived. Connor insisted that she stay for supper, and she found herself sitting at his kitchen table sharing a meal of beef stew and fresh bread. "This is the first time I have eaten at a table with someone in more than a month," Magdalena admitted as they ate. Connor looked at her with surprise and something that might have been anger. "You mean people will not even share a meal with you?" "Most people prefer not to associate with someone they believe to be in league with evil spirits. They think I might contaminate their food or curse their families. That is the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard." "Is it? You are taking a significant risk just by letting me treat Pete. If word gets back to town that you sought help from the demon woman, it could hurt your business relationships." Connor set down his fork and looked at her directly. "Miss Reyes, let me tell you something about my business relationships. I deal with people who judge a man by his character and his work, not by gossip and superstition. Anyone who would condemn me for trying to save the life of someone I care about is not someone I want to do business with anyway." The conviction in his voice touched something deep in Magdalena's heart. She had spent so long being rejected and feared that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to be defended, to have someone stand up for her right to exist and help others. "You are not what I expected," she said quietly. "What did you expect? Fear, suspicion, demands that I prove I am not what people say I am." Connor smiled, and Magdalena realized that it transformed his entire face, making him appear years younger and infinitely more approachable. "I judge people by their actions, not by what other people say about them. Your actions today tell me that you are a skilled healer who cares about helping people. That is all I need to know." They talked late into the evening, sharing stories about their lives and their experiences in the Colorado Territory. Magdalena found herself speaking more openly than she had with anyone in years, telling Connor about her grandmother's teachings and her own struggles to find acceptance in a world that seemed determined to reject her. In return, Connor told her about his early years on the ranch, about the challenges of building a life in such remote and unforgiving country. He spoke of his dreams for the future, his hopes of expanding the ranch and maybe someday starting a family of his own. "It gets lonely out here sometimes," he admitted as they sat by the fireplace after supper. "Beautiful as this country is, it can be a harsh place for someone without companions." "I understand loneliness," Magdalena replied softly. I have been traveling alone for 3 years, never staying anywhere long enough to form real friendships or connections. That must be very difficult. It is the price I pay for trying to help people, but sometimes I wonder if the cost is too high. Connor studied her face in the firelight, seeing perhaps the vulnerability that she usually kept hidden behind a mask of professional competence. "What if it did not have to be that way?" he asked quietly. "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if you had a place where you could stay, where you could practice your healing without being driven out by fear and ignorance? What if you had people who appreciated your skills and valued your knowledge?" Magdalena's heart began to beat faster as she realized what he might be suggesting. "Mr. McBride, I could not impose on your hospitality indefinitely. It would not be an imposition. It would be—" He paused, seeming to search for the right words. "Miss Reyes, in the few hours I have known you, you have shown more genuine care and skill than any doctor I have ever encountered. You saved Pete's life, probably, and you did it without asking for anything in return except the chance to help. That is what healers do. No, that is what exceptional people do. And exceptional people should not have to wander the countryside alone, sleeping under the stars because no one will give them shelter." Magdalena felt tears spring to her eyes at the kindness in his voice. "You do not know me well enough to make such an offer. I know enough. I know that you are skilled, compassionate, and brave enough to dedicate your life to helping others despite the personal cost. I know that you are intelligent and well-educated, with knowledge that could benefit everyone in this area if given the chance. And I know that you are lonely," he added more softly, "just as I am lonely. Perhaps we could be less lonely together." The suggestion hung in the air between them, like morning mist, full of possibility and uncertainty. Magdalena had spent so many years being afraid to hope for acceptance that she barely knew how to respond to such generous offer. "The people in town would be scandalized," she said finally. "Let them be scandalized. I own my land free and clear, and I do not need their approval to live my life or choose my companions. They would say terrible things about both of us. They already say terrible things about you, and you have never let that stop you from doing what you believe is right." Magdalena considered this, realizing that he was correct. She had endured years of slander and persecution without abandoning her calling. So why should she let the same fears stop her from accepting kindness when it was offered? "What exactly are you proposing?" she asked carefully. "I am proposing that you make your home here, on my ranch. There is a house for the ranch foreman that has been empty since Pete moved into the cabin. You could have your own space, your own independence, but you would also have security and people who appreciate your skills. And in return, your knowledge of healing would be invaluable to everyone who works here. Ranch work is dangerous, and having someone with medical skills close at hand could save lives. Beyond that, I would simply enjoy having someone intelligent to talk with, someone who understands what it means to care deeply about helping others." Magdalena looked around the comfortable kitchen, with its warm firelight and the lingering aroma of their shared meal. For the first time in years, she felt as if she might be welcome somewhere, as if she might be able to build a life instead of simply surviving from day to day. "I need to think about it," she said finally. "Of course. Take all the time you need, but know that the offer stands for as long as you want to consider it." That night, Magdalena slept in the ranch foreman's house that Connor had mentioned, and she woke to find that Pete's condition had improved dramatically overnight. His fever had broken completely, and the distinctive gray patches in his throat were beginning to clear. By the end of the week, he was sitting up and taking solid food, clearly on the road to recovery. "You saved my life," he told Magdalena on the morning she was preparing to leave. "I do not know how to thank you for that. You do not need to thank me. Seeing you recover is thanks enough." Pete studied her with eyes that held decades of wisdom and experience. "Connor told me about his offer. I hope you will consider accepting it." "Why?" "Because that boy has been alone too long, and because you have been alone too long, and because sometimes two people can create something together that neither could achieve alone. You think we are well suited to each other? I think you are both good people who care more about helping others than about protecting yourselves. I think you both understand what it means to be dedicated to something larger than your own comfort or convenience." Pete smiled. "And I think you could make each other very happy if you gave yourselves the chance." When Connor rode her back to Cedar Falls that afternoon, Magdalena had made her decision. The town looked the same as it had a week earlier, but somehow it no longer seemed quite as hostile or unwelcoming. Perhaps that was because she was no longer facing it alone. "I will accept your offer," she told Connor as they reached the edge of town. "But with conditions." "What conditions?" "I want to continue traveling to help people who need medical care, especially in remote areas where doctors cannot reach. And I want to be free to leave if circumstances change and my presence becomes a burden to you." "Agreed, with a condition of my own, which is that you give us a real chance."